Hello everyone, ho ho ho, and Merry Christmas. I hope you have a wonderful holiday period. I know this is a little early for Christmas, but I just want to say thank you all so much for watching and commenting and liking and subscribing. You just make me so happy every time I read the comments. Thank you. This happened when I was about 10 years old. Back in those days of a childlike innocence, I had a pure belief in the big guy in the red suit, Santa. What it is to be young, hey? That year, I hoped just like always, Santa would come and leave presents that would be waiting for me in the morning. When I was a toddler, Santa used to leave presents for me and my sister at the ends of our beds. When we got older, I guess it became harder to sneak into our bedroom for Santa. Our presents would be left behind mine and my sister's bedroom door. I guess that was because it wouldn't wake us up that way. I could barely contain my excitement on Christmas Eve, yet somehow I was able to get to sleep. However, my little sister woke up before me and woke me up. She climbed into my bed, giggled, and said, "Hey, get up, Santa's coming." I liked her attitude, so we sat up in bed in the dark of night, talking about nothing important in particular, and we waited for Santa to arrive. It was great. I miss those days. I heard the ticking of our alarm clock and saw the luminous hands point to 2 a.m. I guessed that she would fall asleep soon since she woke up before I did. Just as I was feeling sleepy, I heard something. The doorknob to our bedroom began to rattle like crazy. It was so shocking that my sister and I could only make wide, frightened eyes at one another. All the while, the doorknob continued to turn just beyond the foot of our bed. It was really frightening, but all of a sudden, it stopped. We stared at the door, completely dumbfounded, peeping over our covers in silence. I got up after a while and started towards the door, creeping as quietly as I possibly could. I slowly creaked the door open, and there were our presents, just outside our door. At first I was really spooked, but after a couple of minutes I wondered if it could just be a prank played out by my parents. I smiled and turned to tell my sister what I suspected, but I heard my mum and dad snoring down the hall. Also, the floorboards are so squeaky outside our bedroom, it was really hard to believe that Mum and Dad could have been so nimble-footed and get back to their room without making a sound. I know that you didn't live with us, but if you did, you'd agree with me, trust me. I did consider another option. We had a cat back in those days, and that cat was a real smart cat. She used to jump up on the shelves near our door and try the doorknob with her paw. I guessed that she'd seen us do it enough times that it was a learned behavior. I considered that it could be the cat making all that noise, but there was no way a cat could have turned the doorknob that quickly and that violently. Of course, I understand that it was my parents who put the bag of presents outside our room. I mean, there's no way that it could be Santa, right? But no matter how many times I think about it, something doesn't seem quite right. I really want to know what was behind the door, but somehow I don't want to know at the same time. It's really hard to explain the atmosphere that night. Back then, we were told by our parents to close the bedroom door at night, so that the cat wouldn't get in there and wake us up or be separated from her litter box. My sister always says that we were so lucky that the door was shut. If it wasn't shut, who knows what could have been in the room with us that night. This one is an urban legend. You know, the kind you hear from a friend of a friend, you can never really be sure if the source is lying or telling the truth. Could it be real? Well, I will leave that decision to you. This is the story of a family, perhaps not too dissimilar to your own. The father of the household had just been out Christmas shopping. He was supposed to return home with a trunk full of presents for his family and then sit down, grinning to his wife while they enjoyed a Christmas Eve dinner together. The children eagerly awaiting the 25th. Unfortunately, Dad didn't come home that night. His chair was empty at the dinner table. His wife tried as delicately as she could to explain his absence to his confused children, all the while being nervous herself. The children didn't get their presents that year, and they were terribly sad that Father wasn't there to enjoy Christmas with them. Christmas Day had passed, and then Boxing Day did too, and Dad still wasn't back. Mum was just as worried as the young ones. Reports were filed, policemen arrived and furrowed their brows, but yet no conclusions were reached. Nothing changed in his absence, save for a new smell in the family home. Mother called for a cleaner. She asked for every inch of the house to be cleaned. The days passed, but the odor didn't. The cleaners approached the fireplace and found something in the chimney which they thought to be a blockage. They poked and prodded at the blockage and heard something begin to tumble down the chimney flue. Presents fell all about them. Tattered, dusty wrapping paper revealed glimpses of the contents. Something began to slump down the chimney behind them. It was the body of the missing father. He had climbed upon the roof with the intent to come down the chimney, just like Father Christmas, to please the children. His neck was broken, and he met his end there in the claustrophobic chimney. This happened when I was a little kid. I grew up poor. We never had much. My family and I lived in a really cheap dump of an apartment on the bad side of town. I never got any of the toys and the cool things all the other kids at school got, except for Christmas. I would always get a present on Christmas Day. Each year on Christmas morning, there was always a present there waiting for me. The presents were things like stationery for school or some cheap toys. I was never ungrateful. I eagerly awaited Christmas morning and Santa's gifts each year. I believed in Santa at that age, so I didn't ever thank my parents for the presents. I kept my presents in the best possible condition I could, placing my treasures from Father Christmas gently as I could in my drawers each night. My father was a heavy drinker. Every day he stank of alcohol. He would always get all angry and shout when he was drunk. My mother hated him. She seemed disgusted by him. All she ever did was wallow in her own self-pity. I never would have thought that either of them would give me a Christmas present. I wondered if they even knew I existed sometimes. It wasn't until I was in the 6th year of elementary school that I learned about Santa's true identity. I was so appreciative that my parents found the money each year for a gift for me. It really touched me. Going forward, I wanted to make sure that I thanked them each year. So when Christmas Eve came around that year, I was lying in bed wondering what I might be getting that year and how I was going to thank my parents for it. I was so excited I couldn't sleep. Eventually, I did fall asleep because later I was awoken by a sound. There was a strange, scratching, scuttling kind of noise coming from beside my bed. I knew exactly what that sound was. It was someone leaving a present for me. Then it sounded as if something had just been placed down on the ground. I kept on pretending to be asleep, but I slightly opened my eyes, and there was a black shadow next to my bed. I almost screamed the house down. I kept looking at the shadow and quickly realized that it wasn't Mum or Dad. It didn't even look human. It was a very thin shadow, which vaguely resembled the shape of a human. Its eyes were the only feature I could make out. They were darting around the room. It was like it was glitching out. I couldn't see a mouth or a nose or hair. I just kept staring at it, and for a split second it looked like my father. I knew that thing clearly wasn't him though. It was horrifying. I don't know if I was overcome with fear or I simply just fell back to sleep, but that was the last thing I can remember that night. The next time I opened my eyes, the sun was rising. The present was still there at my bedside. I guessed that perhaps I just had a bad dream. I shoved those dreams aside and sat up in bed. Since it was Christmas, I opened my present. I had been waiting all year for this day. I couldn't believe my eyes. In that box was the latest games console. All the kids were talking about it at school and only a few students in my class had one. I don't know why, but I just burst out crying. I was so happy, and yet I was more grateful than happy. I was overwhelmed by emotion. It was just the greatest morning ever. I ran into the kitchen to ask about the present. I saw my mother there, and I asked her if Dad had given me the present. She said that my father went out drinking and didn't come home last night. Therefore, it wasn't him. I guessed it wasn't from her because she didn't seem to know anything about it. I decided not to say anything about the present. She saw me playing on that games console, but she never asked where I got it. It's like she didn't know if I had one before or not. On Christmas Day, Dad didn't come home. In fact, he never came home. He passed away. We aren't sure when it was, but essentially he drank himself to death. When I got older, I grew up and married my beautiful wife, and I had a child of my own. I always wondered where that expensive gift came from. In my heart, I always knew it was from Dad. I think all my presents were from him. I've thought about it for many years, and I think that he was apologizing for being a terrible dad each year by giving me a little present. I like to think that last one was his parting gift. When my son turned 4, I decided to tell my wife about my theory, and she strongly disagreed with me. She didn't tell me why. She just said it was impossible. I was a little sad. Even as an adult, I cherished the idea of him trying to be a good father for just one day out of the year. We gave presents each year to my son, but I didn't want to leave the gifts for him by the side of his bed, and I told my wife to never do that either. It just didn't feel right. One year, on Christmas Day, he came rushing into our bedroom in the early hours of the morning, brandishing a gift in his hand, and when asked where he had got it, he said he found it next to his bed. I was completely overwhelmed. We hadn't put any of his presents out. Yet there he was, with a present in hand. He opened it, and in the box were some cheap toys and stationery, just like I had when I was his age. It's like my dad came back to give his grandson a present. So Dad, if that was you... No, you know what? I know it was you. Thank you. This happened 4 years ago in December. One night, I heard some noise on the roof. It came from the north side to the south side. It sounded like it stopped just overhead above my bedroom. I looked up at the skylight to see if I could figure out what was going on up there. I saw a man crouched on the roof, peering down into my bedroom. He was clearly trying to stay out of my eyeline. Back then, I lived on the 8th floor of an apartment block. I remember thinking about how incredibly dangerous that must be for him. I didn't care, nor I was worried. I knew all the doors and windows were locked. I just thought that that guy was weird, and not much more. About a week later, a young man in work fatigues came knocking at the door. I've been sent by the landlord to do some cleaning in the fireplace and the chimney. He told me that you'd have a spare key and you'd be fine loaning it to me to complete this work," he said. "I haven't been told about any of this by the landlord," I replied. "Seemed pretty shady to me." "Well, the truth is, sir, it wasn't the landlord that requested me to carry out this work. All I can tell you is that if the chimney and the fireplace aren't cleaned and prepared properly this month, then we're going to have a bit of a problem. And that's why I'm here, to get everything prepared. Okay?" "Don't try and tell me that you don't have a chimney or a fireplace either, because my boss checked the other night. He said that you saw him. You did, didn't you? If we don't get things prepared, then he could get angry, you know. He gave me authorization to come and make sure everything was prepared." I guessed that this was the guy I had seen peering at me through the skylight the other night. And he was, to say the least, incredibly odd or disturbed. I didn't know what the hell he was talking about. I argued back and forth with this guy, because I wanted him to get it into his head that he shouldn't come back, nor should whoever his boss is. I told him in no uncertain terms that he won't be coming in, and to go home. "But it's December. What am I supposed to tell my boss?" He looked as if he was about to cry, and then he slunk off down the hallway, gazing back at me occasionally to see if I would change my mind. It was a weird event, and one I wanted to talk about with my friends, and we came up with a few theories of our own. Full disclosure, some of these are pretty out there. So, theory 1. It was Santa. Because who's the most particular about chimneys that time of year, right? Theory 2. It was a reindeer in human form, who was sent to ask me to clear the chimney for the big boss man. Yeah. Theory 3. It was a very deluded person. Theory 4. It was a prank. Just a prank, bro. Theory 5. 2 separate incidents. 1, a creeper who was perving through the windows that night, and another guy just pranking people door to door. My own personal conclusion is the following. It kills me to say this, but I don't think it was Santa Claus or anyone affiliated with Santa Claus's fine work. I think that the most likely option is that it was either a prank or someone with delusion. Either way, there was a man on my roof looking in at me, and because the roof slants heavily, it was a mad thing to do. With the wind conditions and the ice beginning to form in December, it makes for one hell of a risky prank. It weirded me out enough to spend Christmas and New Year's with my parents that year. When I came back in January, nothing further happened. I can't help but think about it each year though. Perhaps there is still some magic about the holidays out there.